Okay, so is it on? Okay.
Yeah.
So since I went first for my rebuttal, do you
think-
want me to go first again?
Yeah, so then because since I talked last year, yeah.
Sure. Okay, so I'll start with my rebuttal onto why I would still choose the con side to standardized testing based on what Gami told me on the pro side. So in your debate, key points, you mentioned that that tests are a common set of data to refer to and see how students are doing overall. So that right away sparked my interest as to your refer to quote because as I mentioned in my second source from the Harvard Political Review, sorry, no, it was my third source from FAIR Test, the National Center for Fair and Open Testing. Results are being returned so slowly that all we are able to do is refer to them. They are not actually helpful with instruction or how to help individual students. So all we can do is look back and refer to them, like you said. You also mentioned that these test scores are used to make decisions and to monitor growth or non-growth. But I think that is part of the problem is that decisions are being made like with evaluating teachers, like I mentioned in my second source from the Harvard Political Review, and also in my first one from the 11 problems created by standardized testing, that decisions are made based on how students perform, but it might not actually accurately reflect how teachers are doing or how students are doing. So I think that we're monitoring the wrong thing here, and we're making decisions based off of data that isn't actually valid at all times. And you also said that tests are used as a central vehicle in accountability. It's like a check system. And again, that goes back to a lot of teachers being evaluated and punished for lack of performance, or schools being labeled as failing because of their lack of performance. So if you actually were to go into these classrooms of the failing schools, I don't truly believe that we would be checking for the same things as these tests that we mentioned are doing. So I think that the data isn't actually telling us what's going on in a classroom. You mentioned a test where different subjects are being put into the test to create a national report card. But we know nothing about who those kids are that are being selected. Maybe it's the kids that are just really good at that stuff, or we don't like what good does that national report card even do for us if it's so general that it doesn't help any specific school or district. Then what could we actually do except look at supposedly what the nation is doing overall? I just don't think that it's helping with instruction at all, really. I did like when you mentioned the smarter balance. I think it is one of the better tests since it does align with the Common Core. But again, it goes back to reading and writing, as I mentioned in my second source about how the other subjects are not being mentioned. So maybe a student isn't strong in math or reading, and so yes, although that test does align with the Common Core for reading and writing, or for reading and math, those may not be the best things for a particular student, and so they're not getting to, show all their true colors of how much knowledge they actually hold. The WELPA test, which is something that I'm also very familiar with, I think we both are. I think that going back to that first source, it creates anxiety in students, especially like if they're just getting here from another country and then now they're having to show how much English they know, which may be like, it could range from nothing to, they have some knowledge. I don't think that it's a good way to really support their home language or to really show how much they know, because maybe they do know a lot of things that have already been covered in class, but they don't know it in that language. And so they might not perform as well, and it also takes away from the value of their home language to them because they might get the feeling of like, oh, now I have to learn English right now, and I can't like learn in my language anymore. So I think that could definitely take away from their motivation and their imagination and creativity, as Valerie Strauss says in her article. Um, as Duke University mentioned, which you pointed out, that tests are a comparison between schools and districts. Um, but we know from like our experiences and how much money gets put into these tests that if a school has more money, they're going to have more time, they're going to have more resources to prepare for these tests. And the budget for schools vary throughout districts. King County and Highland Public Schools might have a lot less money than a school in Bellevue, like the Bellevue School District or something. And so it's not fair to use these test scores to compare schools and districts. And I just don't think it's very helpful at all to compare them. Just focus on the goals within the district to strengthen them from within. When you mentioned the TED Talk about how there's a correlation between admission decisions and tests, for example, SATs for college, and then how that connects to jobs. Again, this is only considering the smaller percentage of students who are actually good at these tests. Like, what do the SATs even measure? They measure, writing and math and reading. And so if a student is really good at engineering or science, they may not get into MIT, where that has like an awesome program in those fields, because they couldn't pass those tests. And I just don't think that it's that they truly show what students know, and they're very limiting overall. So compare, like back to what you said, how you summarize that they're good for comparing and useful to see where schools are. I don't think this data shows the bigger picture, which is why I still believe that there are definitely many limitations and challenges to standardized tests.
Well, so what I thought about from what you mentioned from your sources, I know you said, what about accommodation to special needs, the diverse learners? How are standardized? If it's standardized one way, how are you going to accommodate for them? And I'm going to go back to my Smarter Balance example. The Smarter Balance test actually now has a lot of ways that they can adapt their tests to accommodate for students. Like now it's a lot of them, you can do it through technology, so using headphones, paper pencil tests. Some parts can be read aloud if they qualify, to receive those services. So there are more accommodations now than there were before. It's going back to that Smarter Balance test. Another thing is about passing a test. That I know you talked about your first source. So yes, we want students to succeed and to show that they can pass that test, but it's only used for data and to see where they are. So it's not just because they didn't meet the standardized test that they're failing as a student. Also, evaluating teachers and teachers being panicking because their jobs are at stake because maybe the school might not perform as well on a state standardized test. Well, like I said in my Duke example, it's used as a comparison most of the time. It's not Duke University, that page that they had was saying how that test is not used solely on budgets or solely on where teachers their jobs. It's a part of what's really going on in that school or district or state. Also, we were talking about the subjects. So I know you mentioned your source that some of them don't have all the subjects like PE and stuff. And I know I mentioned like the SBAC has some few, but it's not a lot. So yes, the Smarter Balance only aligns with Common Core, and that's reading and math. However, each state also has a standardized test for science or for they have certain PE expectations that have to meet. So even though there's not a national standardized test, there might be standardized tests within the state or within like smaller standardized tests specific to that subject. Um, you also mentioned that tests are being slow to the data to return, because I know sometimes when you take the test in March, April, they don't come back until the fall, and you're talking about how that's a lot of time, and how are we going to use that data if it's if effectively if it's taking that long. Um, yeah, sometimes those tests do take that long, but that's one of the things. I'm going to go back to that smarter balance test, which the Smarter Balance test actually has those formative tests and for interim practice tests that teachers can use throughout the school year to see if a student has completed or mastered a standard. So not all tests, standardized tests have this, but Smarter Balance, which is now becoming one of the big standardized tests because it aligns to Common Core and the whole, almost all the nation uses Common Core. That is a good way to provide instant feedback to students and teachers and the school as well to see how they can get ready for their summative SBA test at the end of the year. I know we're talking about budgets. Well, yes, as our Duke example said, standardized tests are only a part of what the school gets or the district gets. Yes, it is an important factor, but it's a good comparison. It's better to have something about the student, the school, or the district than to have nothing at all. So we do kind of need a form of a test, a standardized test, to see to use that as a piece to our whole. So that's one of the things about WAPA that you were saying, how students may not feel comfortable when taking the test because it's a brand new country and they'll already be taking an English test. But once again, the WAPA on the OSPI website for Washington was saying how it's given to all the students who also have a second language, but it's only used for teachers and educators to know how to help the student. So, for example, if a student qualifies level 1, meaning Little English, that information is given to the teachers and to the school, so the school can provide adequate resources for that student, not necessarily saying that that student has to learn only English and cannot use their home language. So overall, standardized tests give like a good piece, a good part to our whole, and it's a good way of checking in and making comparisons.
Cool.
Did we want to do our conclusions? Wait, a conclusion?
The revote?
Yeah.
Okay.
No, we have to do a conclusion.
No. Just our final thoughts, which we write down.
Oh, okay. I thought there was a conclusion. Like, conclude your thinking.
Oh, is there?
I think there was.
Oh, okay. We can do that. So, to recap our debate, the main points from the con side were that standardized testing are very limiting. They limit creativity, imagination, innovation. They're very time consuming, which takes away from the more on hands-on type of learning that can be done in the classroom. It takes away from the critical thinking that can be done in the classroom. It is very nerve-wracking and creates a lot of stress and anxiety among both the students and the teachers. And let's see, it also is very expensive, $1.7 billion, as I said. It doesn't fully capture a student's like span of knowledge because it is limiting to only specific subjects. And the turnaround rate for the data is so slow that we can't actually use it to help with instruction or to help individual students.
To summarize my pros on standardized tests are a good way of seeing a piece to a whole. They are a good use for comparing and to having a knowledge of where a school or district or state is at academically. One of the major pros is definitely the SBA, the Smarter Balance test, which is a newer test. it has those ways to address those summative tests and interim practice tests, so you can get that feedback and improve. And it's definitely one of the inexpensive compared to the other standardized tests that other states and districts have. Also, tests are there's a positive relationship between standardized tests and subsequent success in sometimes decisions that are made when it comes to admissions to college and programs. So we know that there is something there that can help us. And I definitely do agree that there are cons to that, but definitely finding the right type of standardized test would help with this whole testing debate. And I really go with keep going back to the smarter balanced assessment, because they have a different variety to show, as well as the WAPA, which is one example of standardized tests, which kind of gives you a picture of where the level of English to help the educator or the school for students.
Cool. So now we're going to close our eyes and we're going to vote in front of you, Christy, and then we'll tell each other what we voted.
Wait,
cool.
So do we just write it down?
Oh, or we can write it down. That'd be better. I was going to say we just raise our hand. Like, who votes for? So she can see. Okay. So raise your hand if you vote for the pro side of standardized testing. You are for it. Okay. Now, hands down if any are up. Now we're going to raise our hands if we are on the con side of standardized testing, if you think that there are challenges and limitations to standardized testing. Okay. Hands down. Now we're going to tell each other.
Okay.
1, 2, 3, con. All right, that's a wrap.
And we'll write our final thoughts. We'll type them in. We'll send them to you in an email on why we changed or stayed in our vote.
Cool. Hope you enjoyed our long exciting
video,
debate.
2 parts. Don't forget to watch the first part.